Alright, so this will be part one on a lecture on how Mussolini and Hitler came to power. So we're going to start with Italy and Mussolini. So we'll start with the World War I aftermath in Italy. Now, Italy was on the winning side in World War I, but it came out of the war with some serious problems. They suffered heavy casualties. Almost 600,000 Italians were dead and almost 1 million were wounded after World War I. They were suffering high inflation. So by 1920, the lira was worth 1/6 of its pre-war value. And they were experiencing high unemployment, which is similar to what we've seen happen with other countries after war, where factories aren't producing as much, so they lay off workers, or they can't produce as much because people aren't buying the products, so they lay off workers. Soldiers are coming home to find that there aren't jobs available. And again, so all of these problems happened after World War I, and they also ended up leading to other problems in Italy. There were a lot of strikes happening in Italy, and remember, this is a few years after the Russian Revolution had happened, so a lot of the workers were striking because they were inspired by the Russian Revolution. So we had food shortages due to farm worker strikes, transportation and communication were stopped due to strikes, there were strikes in factories, and peasants seized land from large landowners. So we had lots of strikes, usually led by communists and socialists because they wanted to have better working conditions for workers. And this ended up leading to the growth of extremist groups. So many Italians were worried that these strikes would lead to even more trouble, and they began to support militant, right-wing, anti-socialist groups like the one led by Benito Mussolini. He called his group the Fascists, which is spelled Fascists. And this group included small action squads called the Black Shirts. So they attacked opponents and surrounded Mussolini when he gave speeches. By 1922, there were 250,000 members of his fascist party, and they had become part of the government. We're going to pause for a moment and backtrack to ancient Rome. And in ancient Rome, fascists, spelled Fasces, were an ancient Roman symbol for the magistrate, or a civilian who administers the law. And this is where the fasces got their name from. So this is kind of an example of Mussolini and modern Italians trying to emulate or copy the ancient Romans and use symbols to kind of give themselves more credibility. And the picture in here is one of the United States currency. So it shows that many countries kind of use ancient Roman symbols to kind of give credibility to their reputation. All right. Mussolini gained power in Italy by threatening to march on Rome with his 250,000 followers. He threatened to take over the government, and as a result, the Italian king appointed him prime minister. As prime minister, Mussolini quickly eliminated all other parties by violence, threat, and political skill, and he became the dictator of Italy. And as dictator, he made it very clear that he would rule by force if necessary. Communists and socialists were killed or imprisoned, and the fascist party was purged of people who were considered not loyal enough. There was no freedom of speech or press under Mussolini. He created a series of laws to control the press. Anti-fascist newspapers were closed down, and the remaining newspapers were only allowed to print articles approved by the government. The fascists reorganized Italy's economy. Industries were still privately owned, but the government directed them through corporations that set prices, wages, etc. So Mussolini and his government still controlled these industries, but through corporations that they made sure had government workers and fascists on them. Mussolini's policies helped Italy survive the Depression by creating public works, jobs, and modernizing the Italian industry. In his battle for births, Mussolini stressed the tradition of women as housewives and mothers. He restricted female employment to try to solve male unemployment, and the status of women decreased significantly. Although this was not an official belief of the Fascist Party, Fascists believed that the Italian race was superior to African races, which helped gather support for Italian invasions in northern Africa after World War I. Anti-Semitism was not a part of fascist Italy until Mussolini made an alliance with Hitler in the 1930s, and Hitler pressured him into passing anti-Jewish laws. Most Italians ended up ignoring these laws, and until then, about 30% of fascists were actually Jewish, and several of the top officials were also Jewish. Parents were pressured to enroll their children in fascist youth groups that brainwashed their children. For an example, school days in elementary school started with young children saying a prayer that was, "I believe in the genius of Mussolini." So he's trying to create a whole new generation of loyal followers. And Mussolini was a master of propaganda. So he was so good at propaganda. Goebbels, who worked for Hitler and was a minister of propaganda for Hitler, was very impressed with his use of propaganda. Although it should be noted that Mussolini never gained full control of Italy because of his rivalry with the Catholic Church. And the Vatican never actually came under control of him completely. He did have black shirt bodyguards that followed him around as an applause squad to clap and use prompt cards for the audience. He left lights on in his office to make people think he worked 20 hours a day, and pretty much every poster, film, and pop culture made him out to be a hero.